All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Digital Recruiter Podcast. I am really excited about today's guest. Her name is Robin Walters, founder of Rogue Recruitment. Been a digital recruiter client all year. I just had the pleasure of getting to know her, work with her. She's a sales and recruiting rock star. She's a mom rock star, just doing it all, and has just a really unique story and approach. I think a lot of agency recruiters and anyone that's learning wants to know kind of about sales and I think really how to take it to the next level in sales. She's got a great perspective and she's got the results. So I'm excited to have her share her story. Robin, thanks for being here.
Hi, Clark. Hi, everybody.
Well, let's get right into it. How'd you get into recruiting?
I fell into recruiting like I think most people can
Yeah,
probably relate to. I graduated
yeah,
college and started working door to door selling office supplies in a 100% commission role in the Dallas area. So the good thing about that is nothing is scary after going door to door trying to get people to buy paper. And so very quickly realized that wasn't going to be a good long-term fit for me. So my resume
mm,
ironically got passed to somebody at Robert Half, who then passed it to his girlfriend at the time, who was working at a management consulting firm in Dallas, who they were hiring for a recruiter. So they asked me, "Hey, have you ever thought about recruitment?" And of course, my answer was, "Well, no. What is it? I mean, I could get
what is
paid
it?
for doing that, And I think I remember my thought process at the time was, man, if I can go into a random place and sell office supplies, think of the damage I can do in recruitment. And damage just
Mm,
being, be effective and do it pretty well. So I jumped into that, and I worked with a really great management consulting firm in the Dallas area who um, it ended up being fantastic because they place such a care in the recruitment process. And that's how I was brought up and how I learned of what experience is a candidate getting, making sure that that care is really given to them. And then also when they're onboarded and as employees. So I did that for about a year and a half before I relocated to the Tulsa area and jumped into staffing at that point.
gotcha. So you mentioned, and I also fell into recruiting. I think 99.9% of the listeners fell into recruiting. Then there's one person, I think Kevin, who is one of our content coaches now, that mentioned like he studied, like he wanted to get into recruiting from college, which I'm not sure if I still believe him, but because no one really, no one really does that. But I love the kind of the fall into it story and kind of how that resonates with especially the people we have on here like yourself that have had success in this industry, and there's a lot of that relationship kind of care piece that you learned early on kind of seems to be a common denominator. What was it, I mean, on the management consulting side, like what were some of the things that you saw that they did a little bit differently in terms of taking care of candidates and kind of really that relationship?
I mean, you said it right there, just the relationship and building
Yeah,
the relationship with the candidates. And I mean, we had our
yeah,
goals and they wanted us to, be hitting interviews and having good submittals for roles and of course keep the activity up. But the emphasis was always just the care throughout the entire process.
yeah, of just like, is it kind of listening to them, kind of diving in? Is it kind of not doing the whole like, this is the perfect job, you kind of have to take it? Like, what is some of that like? I know that
Yeah.
nuance is where people kind of can get tripped up at times,
And
right? Of
it's
like,
funny because that
yeah,
was it started when I was 21, so 10 years ago. And so I'm trying to go back on it. I didn't recognize and appreciate ne- necessarily the care that could be given until I jumped into staffing and had that comparison point. And so I feel like you're wanting me to dig in a little bit deeper. I just really haven't thought about this in a while. Um,
mm,
I think seeing the impact of when somebody would start the job and work with our company and hearing about their growth and seeing them throughout that process and getting to know them after the fact was what was extremely rewarding and gave that perspective of, hey, when you're talking to a candidate, this is somebody who could be working with you, and not just rushing to fill the job and push against if it might not be the right fit and maybe hiding some details, but really doing your due diligence and, good intentions to make sure it's like a long fit. I had one of my first placements I ever had ended up not being a good fit, and that was a pretty big lesson learned because then I had to work with
It's
him.
we've So that's a whole different consequence, right? And I'm sure that like you hire someone and you got to work with them versus going to Robert Half. You place someone and then you can just wipe your hands clean, right?
Mhm.
At the end of it, well, really at the end of any guarantee period, but it's in theory at least. So that is really interesting. So when you go to Robert Half, and it's definitely different, right? You don't have to work with someone after you place them. Well, yeah. What were some of the differences that you saw going on to the staffing side?
I mean, the big push immediately was just the activity and the metrics and the numbers. And so when I moved to Tulsa for 6 months, I worked at like a locally owned staffing firm. And then I went over to Robert
Yeah.
Half after I was laid off, which horrifying at the time, amazing, turns out. Because
Yeah.
having, have a big fire under my ass when I started at Robert Half. But I mean, at Robert
Yeah.
Half, the mindset switched over to, and this isn't just a Robert Half thing, it's the staffing industry as a whole of, hey, how can I make money off of this person? What is, so a candidate who's fee eligible? What does that look like? There's this idea of candidate control, client control, all of these pieces that really take away that human and that relationship side of it. And I was on the direct hire desk, which means the beginning of every month I was starting my billing at zero. And so no matter what I did the month before, first of the month rolled around and I'm back at zero. So it was really hard to focus on projecting out positions when there was just that immediate pressure of right now I need things to be good. Um, and it Robert Half was great because I got a lot of good training and mentorship, and I learned from examples of what I wanted to do and probably learned a little bit more strongly from what I didn't want to do. And so then
Yeah.
when it got to a point of, I felt like I had gone as far as I could go at Robert Half, I was going to be in that full production seat. I started looking around Tulsa at, well, what other staffing agencies in town approach recruitment in a way that feels more authentic and genuine to who I am and the approach I want to take. And so I looked around Tulsa, didn't find any place, and then mistakenly made a comment to an entrepreneur friend of, I just don't understand why when someone's established enough, they don't start their own firm. And that he looked at me like, Robin, hello.
Just put the mirror right up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that started that
So,
journey, which
yeah.
Rogue then got started in June 2018.
All right. So we're 5.5 years
Mhm.
in. Uh, what was the process like? Kind of the first year. I mean, how long did it take to kind of start to get some traction?
So our mid June started. By the end of July, we had booked, gosh, just was talking about this and looked it up. It was like around 45,000 that first full month. And so luckily I jumped off. I had a support system. I had one of my partners had previously done staffing with me and actually hired me at Robert Half. So we just started attacking and relentlessly going after clients and candidates. And the good thing is, there's that book, Purple Cow, with the idea of, first time you see a cow, you're like, oh, wow, it's amazing. It's a cow, but then you forget about it. It's just like a cow. But if you saw a purple cow, that would be something that you would write home to grandma about, right? So that's the example they gave. So
Yeah.
the idea of, it was already an incredibly saturated market, like staffing. There's everyone's opening up. There's very low bar of entry. And so there's no point in starting another staffing agency unless you're going to do something remarkably different. So that's why, like the name, even Rogue Recruitment, we say like go rogue, we scream it. We're very against the grain and kind of this anti corporate because that's, a way to distinguish ourselves and to break through that noise. And so luckily, our I had built up a really good reputation, my partner had, and so people trusted us enough to be like, hey, let's see how this, what this little scrappy company, what they can do for us. And from the beginning, we've had, I mean, really like no problem getting clients and having job orders. Every time I start to get stressed looking at our jobs, it seems like within a week or two, we picked up several and the problem switched back to the recruitment side.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think you broke a lot of myths that people have about being a small firm just in that alone. Number one, like that people will only go with a bigger firm. It's not true at all. I think if you lean into it, if you try to out corporate a corporate firm, you're gonna lose, right? But if you are you and you're Robin and you're Rogue, then that's how you can win, right? The differentiator is a huge piece. I talk about that all the time. That was one of the first things you and I talked about. I was like, this is a pretty cool thing that you're passionate about. Like, let's get this at least on your LinkedIn profile, right? So people know and like have that story out there. It's kind of in your face. Um, but the interesting thing is, and I don't want to I don't want to miss this because it's so important. Like, we can kind of always get clients. I mean, what do you attribute that to? Right?
Hmm.
Is that like just like the work? Is it in the process? Because I mean, I kind of know the answer for you, but I want people to hear, like you kind of consider like, clients kind of you can always make it happen. Right? You can always get roles and get good roles. Like, what's the key to that?
Consistency. And I don't just mean
Yeah,
consistency in always having like a biz dev campaign or having the conversations, but consistency with your clients. When you say you're going to reach out and give feedback or do something, you freaking do it. If you say end of day, it is going out end of day. Become that trusted partner there where they know, hey, I got it, right? And then there's also, I mean, it stems, I mean, it's your reputation. And even when you don't fill a job, that you have to make sure that that client still thinks you were good and you added value and you helped them, because then you're asking them, hey, who else do you know? What else is happening? Um, and the big power that gives you when you have good clients and you nurture and develop those relationships is you get to fire the bad ones. We
yeah,
just had a client who we've filled a role with him before, and we've had a couple of positions since then, and it's been like banging our head against the wall trying to get feedback, trying to help them. And it stemmed from there just wasn't that basic, honestly, like respect for us being value partners.
yeah,
That's fine. They can go work with another staffing agency. They'll happily take their money, but we don't have to because we have other better clients. And then, how do you know if they're good clients? It's not just, if they pay you, because this one client that I just fired, like they've paid us before. Um, when you, well, I'm going to switch this over, I guess. Like when I'm talking to a client, especially when it's a new one, it's this diagnosing the problem of why are they talking to me in the first place? There's of course that
yeah,
excitement of it's a new client and I want to, oh, maybe this could be a huge account, but that's like down the future. Right now, why do they need me? And is it the salary range is bad? Is it they're looking for too many things? Is the hiring manager just a dick? Like, is he a bad manager? Is the company, do they have a bad reputation? What is going on that makes them need me? And when the answer is, hey, they just don't have the internal recruitment process in place. Hey, they need a little help guiding in this. Well, that's what I'm here for. And when you diagnose what the problem is, then that's when, when I do that, that's when I can really decide, is this a role that I want to work? And can I solve the problems that they have? The big thing is I don't want to tell clients or hiring managers what their problems are and then try and convince them that those are the problems that need to be solved, but really take on more of that consultative partner approach of, well, let's really dive in and understand what's going on. And it's very possible I might not be the right fit to helping them with what they need.
yeah,
However, when they do check those boxes and we are a good mesh, I'm going to be your best friend and I'm going to make your life easier. And there's that true partnership. There's a new client that I just started working with a couple months ago who is a like kind of cold, generic biz dev touch strip campaign through LinkedIn. And he responded back kind of like semi aggressively of sharing some frustrations he's had in the staffing world. And then I think he ended the line with like, if there's an easier way, please let me know. And I loved getting that message because it showed me like, hey, he's had bad experiences with staffing agencies. If I can break through that noise, I think, there's great potential here. But I responded back of just, something to the effect of like, I'd love to be able to say I can solve your problems. I don't know what they are. We got to hop on a call. And so we, got on that call, we built up, and we've placed in the last, we had a start date November 8th and a start date coming up December 4th. So two roles with them. And that's like 18 and $24,000 fees. And it's been a wonderful
That
experience because they treat me well. And in return, like I get to treat them well and we partner together. Um, and I want to work with those clients instead of the clients who don't respect what I do. It's that simple.
yeah, it's simple yet kind of so hard to get to, and I mean I know you've internalized it and you live it, right? So you can maybe make it sound easier than it is, but I think that the key line, and this is something we focus a lot on in the program, especially right now, because I've been catching a lot of people maybe not knowing how to reply at time because there's so many different responses that you get, right? So that's one thing we work on is like, how do you handle certain replies? Because you could get 50 different prospects that say 50 different things in recruiting. If you start to kind of open those doors, what you said is just like, I don't know if I can solve those problems, but I'm happy to learn more about them, right? And then I'll give you an answer. Either way, that alone they've almost never heard from a staffing agency. It's just like, well, what's the rep? What's the role? Yeah, we could work on that. Yeah, we could work on that, right? They commit to something before they have any idea. And that's typically what turns off hiring managers, right? Because typically your best clients are, we always told at Airtech, your best clients already work with staffing agencies, right? Because that's shown that they've are already paid. But typically they're going to come to you because the current ones aren't coming through. Right. So it's like knowing how to communicate to like that person and that like that almost like avatar in a sense is critical, and the kind of the you play dumb not because you're lying, because it's kind of true. It's like, I don't know, like you're bitching about staffing in the inbox, but we just, I'm just digitally meeting you or whatever, term you want to use for that. Like, we got to talk this through, and then you get the questions to kind of dive in, and there's a very real chance like he might have been the problem the whole time, right? Like with those staffing agencies, but it sounded like they actually were, and like this was a solvable thing,
Yeah.
right? But you wouldn't have known that, like without kind of knowing what to say, kind of how to approach it in the inbox. I think that's such a lesson, right, for people. It's just like you open those doors by kind of just saying, like, I don't know, like I'm happy to figure it out with you, right? And that immediately removes the barrier of just like, oh, she's not just trying to get like a rec from me right now and send me a bunch of resumes, because that's typically what most people are doing. Uh, and so
Yeah.
that's like, talk about those actionable tips. Like that's how you stand out. Yeah.
And his problem and frustration with staffing agencies was them just blindly throwing resumes over with unqualified candidates. The first role we sent out, I think I sent 4 or 5 candidates. And one of them was like potentially for another role down the line. And for the second position, I sent 2 candidates. That doesn't mean I wasn't doing a lot of screening and working on my end. Um, but that's another thing. Some clients want to see a lot of candidate submittals so they feel like you're doing your job and working hard. Um, if I'm talking to a candidate and they're not going to be a good submittal, like I'm not wasting my time. I'm not getting the candidate's hopes up. I'm also not going to waste my client's time reviewing it. So that goes back to diagnosing the problem and figuring out, well, what's actually going on with your client. And there's, this is everyone's like heard this before, but it's the idea of, saying no now gives you the freedom to say yes later. And when you say no to the bad job orders, to the bad clients, that opens you up to building those relationships with the really good ones. Um,
You know,
and then it goes back to when you do have the good job orders and the good clients that you want to work with, do you have the time and bandwidth to devote to them, or are you stretched thin because you're trying to turn another job into something that it's not?
ooh, that's a doozy of a line, right? Turning the job into something that it's not, and just it's such a good line, and just the time allocation. I mean, I know you and I have talked about this all year, right? Making sure people aren't wasting their time, making people sure people are actually recruiting and working. Number one, and then I'm sure not wasting their time on roles that are never going to close, right? Or approaching it in a way that they're never going to get a close, right? And you kind of dance around the issue or what needs to be said. And so the client's just like, all right, well, that recruiter doesn't really take themselves seriously. Like, I'm not going to, in a sense, right? Like that's huge, right? To kind of just know your boundaries and know your worth. I mean, that really resonates with hiring managers. Like, all right, like this firm, like, they have their stuff together. Like, I'm gonna work with them, I'm gonna trust their process. And that's huge. And one of the things you said in there is some people just want to see submittals so you're doing they know they think you're doing the work. And I've talked about this before, right? Being able to kind of show your work to clients and like strategically doing that is huge in
Mhm.
the kind of the whole process. Like, how do you kind of navigate that, right? How do you kind of go about showing them like, hey, we are working, so you don't have to send a million submittals to prove the point?
I just have good candidates in front of them and they fill their jobs. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I
Do you
tell
ever?
them I'm
I
having
mean, do you ever share like? Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, do you ever share like we've done this many outreaches or like this is kind of our game plan? Like, does that ever kind of get shared in the process?
I'll mention like, "Hey, I since we just got this role filled, now this opens up this. I'm gonna be doing some outreach and reaching out, get some conversations," and I'll talk through my plan, but I don't really share the specific numbers or anything. I mean, sometimes I'll if I'm on the like with this one client that I was discussing, there was a candidate I was on the fence about. And so we kind of talked a little bit through that without me doing the formal write up. And then we decided, hey, if something's going on with my gut saying I probably shouldn't submit them, there's probably listen to that. Um,
Yeah.
but there is value in that. However, I would say if a client is wanting that to prove that you're working, then you probably want to
It's a
dive
red
in
flag.
why
Yeah.
they need to do that. Now, if it were
Yeah.
like a retained agreement and they're paying you more on something like that, then that would make a little bit more sense. But if it's a contingency, it's not my job to send you 10 submittals. It's my job to get you one higher.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great distinction right there. And I think what you said, just like dig in, and that's kind of the definitely the theme I think of everything in sales, especially in agency recruiting. Just like dig in first, like take a deep breath. Don't rush to get the job order or some agreement signed. Just like dig in until it's like pretty clear what the path forward is, right? Whether that's working with them or you point them in another direction. Um, yeah, I guess when someone isn't a fit,
Mhm,
like how do you approach that conversation? Do you point them like another agency? You kind of like, ah, good luck. I know sometimes recruiters struggle with like what to say when someone isn't a fit on a discovery call because typically like the managers aren't expecting
mhm.
to be turned down by an agency. Um, like how? I mean, what are some of the ways you approach that?
I mean, just start with the truth. Hey, I would
Yeah,
love to be getting a check for you at the end of the day because you and I worked together and I filled this role. However, based on what we're talking about, it really seems outside of the scope of what I focus in. What I focus in is these sort of roles. It sounds like, you know, it sounds like you're looking for a recruiter that's going to do more low touch point, high volume recruitment. Um,
yeah,
I'm not going to be the right fit for that because I focus more on the specialized high touch recruitment. And so if you're looking for a high volume of submittals, you're going to end up being frustrated with the activity that I do. Now, if you
yeah,
have a role that requires more of a specialized strategic approach, I'd be a great fit for that. But based on what you said, I just don't think we're going to be that good of a mesh. And they might
yeah,
be, I mean, honestly, people take it well. I mean, they don't want their time wasted. They'll appreciate it a little bit more. But if they're testy with you, that's kind of even more of a, oh, you made the right call of you're not going to work
yeah,
together. Um, or it's even just, hey, I'll put some feelers out. I'll let you know if anyone happens to come up. But this is just outside of our scope of what we normally do. So we might be able to send some candidates over, but I would definitely reach out to other resources also.
yeah. I mean, that's it right there. I mean, I think just that alone is huge and could save recruiters hours and hours and weeks and months of time, right? If you're just not afraid to have it on the front end of the conversation, right? Dig in and be able to say that on the front end. And then that's where I mean, I think you've always had that, but I think figuring some of those things out and kind of doing some like the internal audits that you've done, be like, oh, that's what we got to get back to. And right, I think that's what you've seen the last few months. It's like you get back to that, right? Cutting out all the extra noise, and like then the follow through comes, right? And you start soaring again. And that's like it's always like this. It's always simple. The fundamentals are simple, but it's so easy to get away from them in recruiting. But you get back to them, it's just like, oh yeah, this is what works. Like none of the other distractions or anything else like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
and for
what?
context for anyone
Yeah,
listening who doesn't know, I recently stepped back into a full-time like production recruitment seat after stepping away from my back-to-back pregnancies. I've been doing a lot of management with the team, and then ironically, after doing the digital recruiter plan, we scaled the team back. And so then I get to focus now and recruit myself, which has been amazing. You're talking about how it's not complicated, but there's all these basics. It's incredibly reassuring because I know if I do this activity, if I have these conversations, if I schedule my day a certain way, if I make sure things are happening, it will result in placements. And
yeah,
just me, my seat doing sales and the recruitment side, within a month, like I'm having 81,000 in starts. and
that's
it's amazing because holidays are coming up. We still have some things in the pipeline. And I thought that number was going to be, it was almost over 100. It was so close, but something didn't come through. But it's amazing because now like I have the flexibility of, hey, holidays are coming up. I can keep traction going. But then the reality is the lawn needs some work. When I got these leaves up, so just, and
yeah,
I say there's a, I guess that was kind of, Clark and I were joking about that, but I can take a breather now because I did the work that I needed. I, knowing the time of the year, consistency, I knew if I did the work, it would happen. And now, like that 81,000 in a month as an individual seat is amazing. And
yeah.
so I share
That's
that
huge.
as,
Yeah,
and this is a what your program preaches also, is just that consistency. If you are having these conversations, if you are doing this work, you you'll be forced to be successful, almost. And people get excited about the $81,000 months and think that that's just going to naturally happen, but that means you're submitting a certain number of candidates each week. It means you're having these conversations with clients. It means you're speaking to, 3 to 5 candidates a day. It means you're sourcing to have that. It means sometimes after the kids go to bed, I need to spend an hour catching up on emails because I told candidates and set the expectation I would get them some information. Um, so now things get to be flexible and chill for this end part of the year, but that's because all of this hard work, and there has to be a balance, and like the hard work and doing the work has to happen. And there is no escape. There's no amount of tools you can use. There is no way to buffer or hide the fact if you are not doing the work because you like I feel like I'm ranting a little bit, but you have to work. There's there's
yeah.
a lot of opportunity and money to be made in staffing, and it is incredibly fulfilling. It's amazing. I have loved working with candidates again and seeing the impact of what I'm doing in their lives. But you have to work, and you have to work well. You can't be everybody's breath of fresh air
Yeah.
because your success should be getting people jobs. You can be a breath of fresh air while you're getting people jobs, but you have to do the work.
You got to get the result, and I mean, I think everyone definitely could tell that, like, yeah, that's not that you didn't have these principles before we started working together, but it's like, and your journey this year has been fascinating. I mean, I think it's been so real in a sense of like how easy it is to kind of think of things one way in terms of building an agency. And I know what everyone is, I'm sure, interested in hearing is just like you just said, like we scaled down to have you actually grow, which is probably going to be the opposite of what people think when I talk about scaling recruitment agencies. I don't always mean adding more people. In fact, I typically don't suggest adding people until you get it right, right? If the owner, the first couple people really are dialed in. This is a lesson, I've had to learn, you've had to learn, like a lot of owners had to learn of like just more tools, more people isn't always the answer, right? It's the right people, it's the right process, it's coming through. Um, that's what matters. So I don't want to kind of get into that a little bit because we connected January, I think January, February, right? You reached out. Yeah, what was the inspiration at the time, right? Just so the listeners know, for you to kind of reach out and for us to start working together.
Yeah, I had my baby in April, so January, February would have been a little bit before that. I had another maternity leave coming up, and Q4 end of the year things slowed down, and this was we're heading up Q1. We got to make a lot of money to buffer my maternity leave, and so I was feeling a lot of stress of needing to just build and create that nest egg for the team. And you talk about, going back of good clients. I had a good client hiring manager, was responsive, wanted us to be successful, gave us great information. They've used agencies before, like the ideal client. The job was good paying, a really good job working exactly in our wheelhouse of what we do. And the search was a train wreck. We had the candidates we sent over, there was just a handful of them, and I think I sourced 75-80% of the candidates for the team to talk to. Once we had the interested candidates in play, there was all these scheduling mishaps of just it was a disaster, and it was so clear that something is wrong with our foundation as a recruitment company. We can't recruit. We're doing the recruitment part very poorly. So I had seen all your content, and I think I just kind of reached out, and so then you and we got the team going in a boot camp, and then it was also great because then you were there to help give that coverage and accountability while I was out, um, doing the whole baby thing.
What I think just have someone to have eyes
Yeah,
on there for you, right? And just kind of like, all right, this is the call. This is who's showing up, not showing up. This is, we're giving them everything we knew with automation, with content, with having conversations, with managing accounts. It's like, let's see what sticks. And I think that's the sometimes a misconception people have, like what we do is like, I'm going to come in and fix all your problems. No, I'm going to reveal who wants to be on the ship and who doesn't want to be on the ship. Like that's ultimately what we do for owners because you kind of need that. It's easy to have the emotional ties and the blinders on with your team, right? Because you assume they're going to care as much as you care, which we all know isn't the case, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be that way. You're never really going to fix that, but you can get people to buy into the vision and just do what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis. And I think we kind of trying so many things to kind of reach through. And then I think, right, that I think was kind of revealing for you. And we kind of kept talking like, all right, what's kind of not clicking here? Right, and we kind of kept going, right, even after, the initial 90 days. I think there was you were definitely when you were available to use it because you were on maternity leave, like, you knew the process right away. You're like, "Oh, this stuff makes sense." The LinkedIn stuff, the outreach, right, some of the campaigns, like, you were just like, "Ah, I wish I could get back to it," in a sense, and then over the summer, I was like, "Well, you're doing this, right?" Couple, another person on your team is definitely getting the hang of it, but, like, is everyone actually doing what that you're paying them to do in a sense, and that's their choice, right? I don't know if we kind of want to talk about that a little bit, but like, as an owner and kind of giving people the choice to show up or not show up, like what's been kind of, I would say, like the evolution, or what have you learned kind of in that part of your journey?
yeah, and I think saying choice is the big emphasis of the word there, and because as a leader, you always want to make sure that if somebody is going to lose their job, it is by their choice. And so what that meant for me was, did they have training and access and all the tools available to them that they could have been successful if they chose to? And when we first spoke, I was telling you, hey, I'm worried that I'm not seeing this clearly because I care about the team a lot. And I'm also pregnant as hell. I don't know, like, if I'm taking offense to things that aren't actually there. So you and I spoke, and it was that reveal what's going on. And it goes back to there's that cool vision and idea of what recruitment can be and the
Yeah.
lifestyle you can have with it. And like I'm living proof that that works and how I'm going to have this next month to really relax, keep momentum going, but it's because I did the work and the balance. And there's it's really easy to see both eye like the coin, right? And decide, well, I want to do the easy side. I want to have all that flexibility and with but you have to spend time on both sides of the
You
coin.
gotta earn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it when the decision was made to scale back on the team, I felt horrible about it because, I'm human, and I care, but it also because we partnered together, it took away the guilt of, well, was this because I was out on maternity leave because I wasn't able to do all of this for them and keep the accountability going myself when it was, well, there was a choice there. Now, that doesn't mean me being out didn't impact the team because it did, but that didn't change the fact that there still wasn't those results. I mean, the last team meeting we had, you were on it with me. The one person had one submittal the prior week, and that's after 6, 9 months of being in this program, knowing the expectations are higher, and that was their choice to have that output. Somebody else on the team wasn't engaged or paying attention to the meeting. I mean, that was their choice. None of this should have been um, a surprise. And I say all this delicately because I do care very much about the folks who are impacted. Um, but to circle back to all of this is you have to do the steps, you have to do the work. And when you follow all those steps and you have the right activity, have the right conversations, work with the right clients, work with the right candidates, do everything right along the way, it's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
there's you get to build these relationships with candidates and see. I mean, there's somebody who he starts in December. Okay, this is gonna sound like a crazy story. One, the job with the client, their job description was dated November 2022. So they've been looking over a year, which big red flag, right? But diagnose, well, what's going on that they need me, right? Within, I think, 3 weeks, we get an offer out. And a week of that was delayed because the client was out of town. Okay, so immediately feel that on the other side of it, which feels good, of course. But what's I love is the candidate who's taking this job. He was actually my first billing client when I moved to Tulsa in August 2015. Now he's since like moved on to another role, but I mean, just consistently incredibly nice guy. He treated me with respect back when I was 22, not knowing what the hell I was talking about, doing my questions I'm supposed to ask, well, tell me about the size of your environment, what servers are like doing all that
Yeah.
stuff. He was incredibly kind then, and it's an incredible job. He's getting a like almost $30,000 pay increase plus a 20% pension plan. Like it's an amazing job and opportunity for him. And like being able to, 2015, that was 8 years ago. And it's a
Yeah.
long-term game, and like he's always treated me with respect. I've always done the same for him. And just seeing that impact that that's going to make in his life is like literally life changing. And the client has had this position open over a year. and that he's so like
Yeah.
it's just such a good mesh, and it that feels so good. And yes, it's exciting to think, oh, cool. Well, now my family gets to make money. You know, my family's supported because of helping his family, and it's so of course that part of it is, but that's always kind of secondary because I'm just so excited for him and building that relationship and seeing that come through. I have another candidate who is starting also December 4th, and after we talked about a job, she had looked up like the company on their website, and it's like no third party agencies, you know. And she reached out to me like, Robin, can you confirm you're working with them? And like, cause and I was like, yes, I promise I got you. You're sent over. And
Yeah.
so we've been laughing about that too. But building those relationships, having those little stories, and then have a great life. You know, my family's like being very well supported. I've taken care of what I need to. Um, all of that is fantastic, and it starts from the very beginning of are you doing the right outreach? And you can't skip
Yeah.
steps because those steps are incredibly important. Um, but it is your job as a leader is to make sure it is a choice. And partnering with you made sure it was a very clear choice to circle back.
We had yeah, those are great stories. I mean, 8 years, which is like 80 years, I think, in dog recruiting years, however you wanna
Yeah,
calculate it.
that was a lot pressure.
It's yeah, this life is a lot different, to 2015. We still had our innocence, but, it it's I mean, those are great candidate stories, and I think what it circles back to, I know what you were trying to, what you were the point you were making, maybe I'll make some of it for you is, we track those KPIs. So we let them self-report every week. And even in that, the numbers were pretty low. I mean, some people weren't even trying to make up numbers. Maybe sometimes, maybe sometimes they were, but their made up numbers were still below the expectation. And that'll happen. I've seen that across the board with agencies that I've worked with. I mean, it happens at Airtech, Robert Half. I mean, people do what they can, or you have an off week, you fudge the numbers a little bit. Sure, I get it, but over time, you're going to be revealed in recruiting. If you don't have the activity, you're not going to have the results. If you don't, have the results, like enough said, in a sense, right? You always look at effort first and activity, and it just became so clear, right? And that's what I wanted for you, is for you to have a clear picture of what was going on, like what reality was, and because it's easy to have that emotional tie. I care about my team. It hurts sometimes to have those conversations with my team. Like I get it, uh, but it has to happen. I think being able to do that has now allowed you to not spend days worrying about that, and to actually spend time focusing on what matters, right? And now you're able to create this story because you've allowed yourself the opportunity to do what you do best, versus trying to pick up people that have shown they aren't invested in being there. And that's okay, right? Just like you talk to hiring managers, hey, I don't think we're a fit to work with you. It's got to be the same thing with your team. Like we've got the tools, we got the training, none of it's sticking. I think you like just being remote and doing whatever, but I can't fund that, right? Like it's just like you gotta like that's just not on me. Like you gotta go somewhere else for that, and that's okay. And sometimes you have to be the bump in the road for someone else. But that again, I said that's their choice. But now that you've opened up the door for this, that's where the growth happens, right? And every coaching program or whatever, like Digital Recruiter talks about like ROI, added 6 figures and 7 figures in placements and yada yada. But like this is the work it takes to get that. And that can be 2 weeks in, 2 months, a year in, 2 years in, whatever. But the whole thing is like, what is your journey, your path? And I don't know if we saw this coming in February, right? But it's like you don't even know kind of like what the path was going to look like. You just knew you needed an extra set of eyes to kind of help get there, and it's kind of where you want it to be. And I think that's just very real as like an agency owner. Like it's not all glamorous. Like just like you got to get in, get your hands dirty, figure out who wants to be on board, figure out what you got to do, and then just go do it.
Yeah.
Like
And
simple as that, right?
it's been
Yeah,
pretty validating stepping back in because you when you get out of production a little bit, and my team, my a lot of my focus was on the management and the operations side, especially when my bandwidth was so limited because I was working on maternity leave. um, I
yeah,
didn't only had so much time, and so you start to hear excuses, or just excuses are even not, you're not even getting excuses, you're just not getting coverage on your jobs. And you see these good jobs and you're like, what is happening? And so then, you look on LinkedIn and people are like, oh, it's really hard to be a recruiter right now. So you start to kind of hear that. And so, um, we saw that when, my previous partner who had stepped away from production came back in production, and all of a sudden she was filling jobs. She was making things happen. And so,
Right away.
yeah. And so I'm stepping, I'm thinking like, hey, it's not that hard. Like, why aren't y'all just working and doing it? And so now that I'm not having to spin my wheels on the management side and have a lot less operational work, and I'm me myself on the production seat, boom, it's not that hard. You just have to work.
Yeah.
And so it's been really reassuring to know, like, oh, I still got it, and then also just to
Yeah.
hear, to be able to step in and show that the possibility and the opportunity is absolutely here.
Uh,
It's a
It's
choice.
right there. It's completely a choice. I've heard the excuses all year, and not to say that it isn't a tougher year, but there's still work, right? Even a 15-20% reduction in a $150 billion industry is still 100 plus million, 100 plus $1 billion, excuse me. Right. There's still someone's getting paid somewhere on the agency
Mhm,
side. And I think just having that attitude is so important. And you talk about standing out just from a principles and marketing piece, but just standing out from a sales piece, it's just having that mindset. The business is out there, and if I'm not getting it, I got to look internally first. Like, what am I doing? What am I not doing? Right, and just that, and it's never going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes, and that happens, right? I think you would even say, like, as you said, like, it wasn't maybe ideal, right? It's not like the scaling back means the other people were 100% in the wrong, right? It's not that way at all. It's just it can be a little bit circumstances, right? And you can make excuses, but it will catch up to you after a while. If you own what you can own, it's going to work out. As you said, you're almost going to be like forced to win
mhm.
in a sense, and like that is such a key mindset to have in agency recruiting because it is a grind. But if like you just keep at it, like you will win. And the only people I see quote unquote lose are the ones that don't have that mindset or they think it's gonna be easy and they show up for a couple weeks or just 2 months and then they're like, well, it didn't work for me. It's like 2 months? Like I'm figuring this out after 10 plus years still. Like 2 months? Like, are you kidding me? Like that's nothing, right? Like we have a 90-day program because I want you to get the framework and the exposure to the information, the process that I know can change your life. But it's going to take longer than 3 months for all the things to be humming and come together and you to see the maximal, I would say, like fruit on that investment. Right. And that's the fun part. You can see stuff early, right? Let's have people make placements the first week or two working together. That's great. But like, I want you to make hundreds of placements more from this in less time over the next 5, 10,
Mhm.
15 years. Right. And it's just like, it's just staying with it, right? Who's on board, who isn't? You can always get 1099 recruiters. There's plenty of people that would love to work remote. 1099, and just kind of, I think, even thinking the way of kind of building out your team because you actually have recruiters
Mhm.
right now, right? But they're, again, you're not like it's a much healthier dynamic, right? Because they eat what they kill in a sense, and it's kind of how you are. It's how you were trained, right? And I think you kind of remove the expectation of what you maybe thought an agency should look like to like what actually works for you, and that's super important. That's what I love that like we got you to that place, which was my initial goal for you, right? It's like help you figure out what's going to work for you to make this thing profitable and
Yeah,
enjoyable
and
again.
it was at a point, and I never shared this with you, but as I was looking back to coming back, after maternity leave, like, I'm cutting my pay again, things just aren't working, and I updated my resume, and I was like, because my job was no longer working and supporting my family and making it work, and so, but then I started thinking, well, what about my job isn't working right now? Surely if anyone's gonna have the power to fix it, it's gonna be when you own the company, and I'm so glad that I just stepped back into production myself. And it was a few weeks ago, I was driving to pick my kids up from daycare, and I just had this realization of I finally have the dream job. like this, I have the flexibility I need. I'm able to be, the mom that I can. I have a 2-year old and a 7-month old. Um, I'm able to take just care of what I need to and support my family in this industry and job that I just love doing and get immense satisfaction out. Like I'm finally living the dream of what that it should have been, of what it should be when you start your own business and have all of this. And it is unfortunate that scaling back the team had to happen. Um, but it's a big journey that I've taken these last several years is recognizing where my responsibilities lie with employees. And I'm not responsible for supporting anyone's family, but I'm responsible for providing them the opportunity so they can support their families. And
Yep.
that's a big distinction. And it comes back down to choice. And now that I get to make the choice of how I want to spend my time and my work, I am able to check all the boxes that I need. And I finally have the dream of what I've been looking for.
I love it. I love it. It makes me really happy to hear that because and you did share that with me in the middle of the chaos of the summer, and that's where I think I kind of realized, well, this is kind of the choice you have in
Hmm.
front of you, right? And you kind of went with it, and I loved it. Like you text me the updates, you call me with updates, and I love hearing that. I mean, that was the whole goal of this was to get you through that maternity leave out on the other side, like knowing like well, yeah, I do, but I think you needed that moment to be like, "Wait, what am I doing? Like, I don't have to go down this route. I just have to kind of rip the Band-Aid here." And I think within a week, I think I remember like your stress was like way lower. You're just like, "Oh, I actually like do this again." You said validating because you got the skills, and it's just staying with that. And now, when you if you choose to build again, and now you have the choice if you want to keep going this way, you want to kind of build. I think you know exactly what you're going to be looking for and the type of people that you're going to be looking to kind of partner with, and that are going to treat the Rogue name with kind of the respect that it's earned, right? And kind of having that on your profile and representing that that means something, right? There's a certain process and way. It's not just Robin, but it's like kind of the Rogue way, right? As you have on your profile, like, you're like, hey, we have to live this like day in and day out. And I think just knowing that, setting those expectations going forward, I mean, that's what's going to be fun to see the next five
Yeah.
years as you're doing this. You hit the 10-year mark, like when you look back and like, wow, this is quite a journey, right? So that's what I'm excited for, for you. So
Yeah. And
super
it's,
cool, super
ironic you
cool.
scale back the team and when I tell people about it, they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you doing okay?" And well, what does this mean for Rogue? Is Rogue still working and in operation? And like we made these changes mid-September, so we've had an entire, Q4 will be more billing than Q1, 2, and 3 combined. So, but by scaling back, it means we get to be more focused. And like, since I am now recruiting, like Rogue's doing more and has more of an impact, and it feels good knowing the details are covered and candidates and clients are
Yeah,
being treated how
yeah.
they want to be.
And you got that's amazing, right? And it could take some time and effort. I think just digging in, figuring out the root cause. It's what we did, and then you had to make the tough decisions, and now you're reaping right the fruits of that. Even though it can be hard, and now I mean you got what 20 plus like IT engineering jobs, you accounting and finance on there. Focus in Tulsa, like you're really owning that market, and this was a tougher year, but now you're really poised for 2024 to be
Hmm.
incredible from a profitability aspect. So I'm super excited for you. I love that you were able to share the story. I guess one last thing, what would you kind of leave as like for maybe aspiring agency owners or current agency owners, kind of one piece of advice, um, maybe as they like kind of look to start their agency or in their infancy stages of their agency, what's like one big piece of advice you would give them?
Take it day by day, step by step, and don't try to replicate yourself and spin your wheels trying to replicate yourself because you're not going to. There's a reason you're you and
Yeah.
why you're in the position you are, why you have the reputation and the brand to start your own company successfully. Um, and it's easy to get caught up in, oh, if there was another me, then I could be doing all this other things, or we could have way more revenue, all this other stuff. And yeah, that sounds fantastic. But before you do that, just focus on your strengths, what you're good at, and what you need to make the job work for you, and build around that. Don't focus on what other people need and then you always be secondary. If you're taken care of, everything else will work and be taken care of also. But it it's not even the right word, but it's okay to be a little bit selfish when it's your company. But that's a wrong word because you're not being selfish. You're just taking care of yourself. Yeah, boundaries.
Boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's okay to have boundaries
Gotta
and
have
stop
boundaries.
trying to replicate yourself.
It's very well said, and it's just a great way to end it. It's such a good piece of advice, and yeah, I hope if you're listening, you take that to heart because this is, I'd say, the downfall of many businesses, but especially in agency recruiting. Right, like do what you need to do. I said to provide the opportunity for someone to make it happen for themselves and their family, as Robin said earlier. So I love that. Well, I know we can find you on LinkedIn, right? Robin Walters on LinkedIn. Is it roguerecruitment.com, the
Yeah.
website? Yeah. We'll have all the links on the podcast, like episode summary. So make sure to connect with Robin if you're in the Tulsa area. Maybe if you're not in the Tulsa area, I don't know. And you need some IT engineers, accounting and finance help. Reach out. Her and her team are awesome. I've worked with them personally, and it's incredible that just kind of the work ethic and the coverage that they can have, and just the quality of their work. So definitely someone you should connect with if you haven't done so already. So Robin, appreciate you being
Yeah.
here.
Thanks for having me, Clark.
All right. Well, until next time, we'll, I'd say rate the episode. What, 5 stars? I think someone gave me a 1 star last week on Spotify, which is
It
mean.
was
So
me.
if you have it in you, it was Robin. All right, I found the culprit. So if you have it in you, give us a 5 star on Spotify so we can kind of reach more recruiters and kind of share the good word, the good stories, and the good processes about what it's really like working in the industry and how fulfilling it can be, but also the grind. So until next time, happy
All right.
hunting,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye.